My name is Eleanor Whitman, and at 65, I've learned that mornings in Charleston move slower than you expect, even when life feels urgent. The cobblestone streets glimmered wet from an early drizzle, and the smell of roasted coffee beans drifted from the corner cafe where I usually stopped for a small cup. Sophia and Leo were still asleep upstairs, curled under blankets that smelled faintly of lavender and sunshine. I slipped on my worn leather loafers and adjusted my scarf, a simple blue one my daughter had given me last Christmas. The plan was simple. Pick up Chloe's wool coat from Arthur's dry cleaner, then stop at the bakery for a few rolls before the grandchildren woke. A small errand, just one more in a lifetime of running after everyone else's schedules, meals, and appointments. Charleston in the morning has a rhythm of its own. Street vendors called out with the day's fresh produce, a trolley clanged somewhere in the distance, and a few joggers passed in measured strides. I nodded at familiar faces. Mr. Henderson, watering his begonias. Mrs. Wilcox, walking her miniature schnauzer, exchanging polite greetings. Everything felt ordinary warm, even the kind of quiet you carry in your chest when life is steady, predictable. Arthur's dry cleaning was tucked into a narrow side street, a faded wooden sign swaying with the wind. I reached for my purse, feeling the small claim ticket between my fingers. Chloe's voice had been soft, almost rushed that morning when she pressed it into my hand. "Mom, please pick this up. I have meetings all day." I had nodded, barely thinking. As I approached the door, the familiar scent of fabric softener mixed with the faint tang of bleach. Inside the shop was quiet. Arthur bent over a notebook at the counter, glasses perched precariously on the end of his nose. Normally, he would send his young assistant for these errands, but today he looked up as I entered, his eyes locking on mine with something I didn't immediately recognize. Before I could greet him, his hand shot out, gripping my arm gently but firmly. "Eleanor," he murmured, voice low and urgent. "Come with me for a moment." The warmth of a normal morning was gone, replaced by a chill that traveled down my spine. Arthur led me behind a tall, threadbare curtain that separated the front of the shop from the cramped back storage. The air back here was heavy, with the mingling scents of bleach detergent and the faint tang of mothballs. My heart thudded against my ribcage, each step feeling slower than the last, as if time itself had thickened. He stopped near a stack of folded linens and turned to face me, his glasses catching the dim light. His hands trembled slightly, and for a moment I wondered if he'd seen a ghost. "Eleanor," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "you need to listen very carefully. Take your grandchildren and leave this town before sunrise." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. "Arthur, what are you talking about?" My voice cracked despite my effort to remain calm. He shook his head, his eyes scanning the front of the shop, as if making sure no one else was listening. "I can't explain everything here. It's not safe, but you have to trust me. Your grandchildren," he hesitated, swallowed hard, then added, "they're in danger." I felt my stomach tighten, cold tendrils wrapping around me. Sophia's laughter from earlier, so vivid in my memory, now seemed fragile and distant. Leo's tiny hand in mine during breakfast, so ordinary, so safe, flashed in my mind. And suddenly, the ordinary errands, the predictable rhythms of the morning felt like a distant, fragile dream. Arthur reached into the pocket of his apron and pulled out a small, clear plastic bag. He handed it to me without a word. I held it weightless and heavy all at once. Inside, I glimpsed something that made my fingers tremble before I could even see clearly. "You must leave immediately," he repeated, his tone sharp, now urgent. "No questions. Go home, pack what you need, and take them out of town. Don't hesitate and don't tell anyone." I swallowed my throat dry. "But, Chloe," I began, and then stopped, the words sticking. The thought of confronting my daughter now in this shadowed back room seemed impossible. My mind spun with possibilities, and none of them were good. Arthur's gaze was unwavering. "There isn't time to explain, Eleanor. Trust me on this. Just go before sunrise." I nodded slowly, my hands clutching the plastic bag, my pulse racing. Outside, the shop's normal hum continued, unaware of the storm pressing down on me. Whatever was in that bag, whatever danger Arthur had glimpsed, had already shifted my world. The ordinary morning I had started with coffee cobblestones. Familiar faces was gone. Back in my small kitchen, the bag felt impossibly heavy in my hands. My fingers shook as I set the coat carefully on the counter, trying to steady my breathing. Sophia was humming a little tune on the living room rug, and Leo was pressing his toy dinosaur against his cheek, oblivious to the tension in the air. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself that it was just a mistake, some misunderstanding. But the fear pressing against my chest refused to be ignored. I unzipped the coat slowly, each motion deliberate, as if rushing would make the world collapse faster. The bag slipped out easily, a small, clear plastic envelope that seemed ordinary at first glance. And then I saw the contents. A crisp bank transfer receipt, stamped with numbers so large my eyes refused to believe them at first. Millions. Millions of dollars moving from one account to another, traced through names I didn't recognize. My heart pounded violently. I held the bag tighter, the paper crinkling beneath my trembling fingers. Then, beneath the receipt, a photograph caught my attention and froze my blood. Sophia and Leo smiling innocently with bright eyes that reflected trust and love, but someone had drawn 2 circles in red marker around their faces. Crooked, angry, deliberate. The lines seemed to burn across the paper, marking them not as children, but as targets. I sank into a chair, gripping the edges of the counter for support. My mind raced Chloe. Could my own daughter be involved? The thought was unthinkable, yet the evidence stared back at me, cruel and undeniable. Panic rose in my chest, sharp and choking. My grandchildren's laughter and small noises of play became distant echoes, replaced by the cold, hard reality that their safety might be compromised by someone I had trusted above all. I glanced at the clock. There wasn't much time. Dawn was still hours away, but the weight of what I'd discovered made each minute unbearable. I had to act, but I didn't yet know how. Every instinct as a grandmother screamed at me to protect Sophia and Leo, to shield them from this danger. My hands shook as I wrapped the bag carefully and tucked it into the deepest pocket of my coat, as though hiding it from the world could somehow keep them safe. I took a deep breath, forced myself to stand, and looked at my children, playing with their toys. Their lives, so small and fragile, were now at the center of a storm I didn't yet understand. And in that moment, I realized nothing would ever be ordinary again. My hands were still trembling as I set the plastic bag on the kitchen counter, its weight, a constant reminder of the danger looming over my grandchildren. I swallowed, forcing myself to think clearly. First things first, we needed to leave. I moved quickly, almost mechanically, gathering essentials into a small duffel bag. Water bottles, snacks, a few changes of clothes for Sophia and Leo, and the small dolls and toys they could not sleep without. Every item I packed felt like armor against an invisible threat. I pulled out my phone and dialed Grace, my oldest and most trusted friend. The line clicked, and her calm voice answered immediately. "Eleanor, it's early. What's wrong?" I exhaled sharply, trying to steady the panic that had gripped me since discovering the bag. "Grace, I need your help. Can you get a taxi discreet tonight? I don't have time to explain everything." There was a pause. Then Grace's voice softened, but firm. "Of course. I'll call Mike. He's reliable and discreet. He'll be there in 10 minutes. Keep the children calm, Eleanor. You're doing the right thing." I hung up, heart still pounding, and turned to Sophia and Leo. "We're going on a little trip tonight," I said, forcing cheer into my voice. "We're going to see a fun place, but we have to be very quick." Sophia's eyes widened, and Leo tilted his head with curiosity, clutching his dinosaur tighter. I knelt, stroked their hair, and whispered reassurances. I barely felt myself. Every step I took felt urgent. I double-checked the bag in my coat pocket. The evidence inside could not be lost. I glanced at the clock. There were still a few hours before sunrise, but time felt impossibly short. My mind raced through bus schedules, taxi routes, and safe spots to lay low once we left Charleston. Every detail mattered. When the taxi arrived, a low black sedan with no markings, I guided Sophia and Leo into the back seat. I buckled them in, carefully checking twice that everything was secure. The driver, calm and professional, didn't ask questions. I exhaled slowly as the city streets began to blur past the familiar sidewalks and street lamps of our neighborhood, disappearing behind us. As we drove, I held the bag close, feeling its weight press against my chest. I thought of Chloe, of the life we had known, and of the threat that now hung over my grandchildren. The ordinary world I had taken for granted had vanished, replaced by a quiet, urgent fear that demanded action, and I had no choice but to lead them through it. The lights of Charleston faded in the distance, and I knew the first night of this long, uncertain journey had begun. By the time we reached Charleston, dawn had begun to tint the horizon with pale orange. I had Sophia and Leo quietly dozing against my shoulders, their small bodies a fragile weight I could barely bear to let go of. The taxi pulled up in front of St. Francis Church, a quiet sanctuary amid the city's awakening streets. I led the children inside, careful to keep them unaware of the fear pressing at my chest. Father Michael was waiting in his small office, the scent of old wood and candle wax comforting against the tension that clung to me. His eyes softened when he saw us. "Eleanor, what brings you here so early?" I explained as much as I could, without alarming the children, showing him the plastic bag and its contents. He studied the photograph, his face tightening at the red circles around Sophia and Leo's faces. "This goes far beyond a family dispute," he murmured. "You're right to be cautious." Later that morning, I met Victoria, a sharp-eyed lawyer and parishioner, in a quiet office tucked behind the church. She examined the receipt and documents carefully, her fingers precise and deliberate. "Your daughter's behavior has been subtly unusual for months, hasn't it?" she asked, not accusing, just observing. I nodded, recounting small oddities I had dismissed at the time. Together, Father Michael and Victoria began outlining a realistic plan. Protect the children first. Verify the evidence. Prepare for action without alerting anyone who could compromise their safety. My head spun with possibilities and dread. But for the first time since the discovery, I felt a flicker of direction amid the chaos. Victoria's office was quiet, except for the soft hum of her computer and the occasional shuffle of papers. I sat across from her. Sophia curled against my side, and Leo clutching his toy car in my lap, trying to focus on their small, innocent movements while my heart hammered against my ribs. The plastic bag rested between us, its contents now laid bare. The transfer receipt, the photograph with the red circled faces, and documents linking a network I had barely dared imagine. Victoria leaned back in her chair, eyes grave. "Eleanor," she said softly, "there's no way around this. Your daughter is involved." I blinked, refusing to believe it. "Chloe, my daughter." My voice cracked. She couldn't." Her expression did not soften. "I wish it weren't true, but the evidence points to her being complicit in a criminal scheme targeting your grandchildren. The transactions, the planning, everything aligns with a network that deals in exploitation." The world spun around me. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to hold back a sob. Memories of Chloe, her small hands helping me in the kitchen, her laughter during holidays, her whispered secrets when she thought I wouldn't notice clashed violently with this cold reality. The daughter I had loved, trusted, nurtured, could be the very person endangering Sophia and Leo. I glanced down at the children, their bright eyes unaware of the danger I now knew was real. A twist of nausea seized me. My hands shook as I gripped the edges of the desk. What? What do we do? I whispered almost to myself. Victoria's voice was steady, but firm. First, we protect the children. Keep them safe and out of sight. Then we gather every piece of evidence we can. You can't confront her directly, not yet. If she senses you know the risk to Sophia and Leo skyrockets. I nodded, slowly, swallowing the lump of disbelief in my throat. My role had shifted overnight from grandmother to guardian in a war I hadn't chosen. Every instinct I had to love, to forgive, to trust was now at odds with the cold, undeniable proof before me. The betrayal was real. Family trust, something I had believed unshakable, had shattered. And yet amid the fear and heartbreak, a single thought anchored me. I would do whatever it took to keep my grandchildren safe. By late afternoon, Eleanor sat in the small rental apartment with Sophia and Leo, quietly coloring at the kitchen table. The air was thick with anticipation. Victoria, the lawyer, had arrived earlier, accompanied by 2 federal agents, Miller and Davis, both in plain clothes, but their presence carried a gravity that tightened Eleanor's chest. "Eleanor, we'll handle this carefully," Victoria said, her voice calm but authoritative. "The first priority is keeping the children safe. We'll monitor communications, track movements, and coordinate the operation. You stay with them, but remain close enough that we can update you at every step." I nodded, my hands clutching the arm of my chair. My heart hammered, knowing that Chloe, the daughter I had loved, was now the target of a carefully laid plan, and that any misstep could put Sophia and Leo at risk. The agents explained the procedure: stakeouts near likely meeting points, phone monitoring, and careful coordination with local law enforcement. Each step was mapped with precision timelines down to the minute. Sitting there, I watched my grandchildren, their small hands moving with innocent concentration, and felt a fierce protectiveness surge through me. Every instinct screamed that they must remain untouched, unseen by the chaos that threatened just beyond our walls. Victoria opened the plastic bag again, reviewing the evidence with the agents. The receipt, the photograph, the plane tickets, each detail confirmed the urgency and scale of the threat. My stomach tightened as I imagined Chloe and her accomplice making their moves, unaware that every message, every phone call was being monitored. Hours passed slow and tense. The children played quietly while the adults coordinated silently, whispering instructions and updates. Occasionally, Miller would glance at me, giving a small nod that reassured me they were ready. I had never felt so simultaneously helpless and empowered. Finally, the moment approached. Victoria whispered the plan once more. Intercept the accomplice at a predetermined location, let Chloe make the first move, then move in. My pulse raced as I guided Sophia and Leo to the living room, keeping them calm, while keeping my own fear tightly under control. Outside, the city's streets were preparing for evening. I could hear distant traffic, the faint hum of life, continuing as if unaware of the storm we were about to contain. I held my grandchildren close, feeling their warmth, and braced myself for the long night ahead. The morning sun filtered through the narrow curtains of our small Charleston apartment, casting soft light across the modest kitchen where I was already preparing breakfast. Sophia's high ponytail bobbed as she carefully poured milk into her cereal, and Leo fidgeted with the lid of a peanut butter jar, humming a little tune. For the first time in weeks, the ordinary rhythms of life felt real again. Yesterday, the police had moved swiftly. Chloe and her accomplice had been apprehended without incident. The plastic bag, the receipts, The marked photograph, all evidence in hand, had ensured the safety of my grandchildren. The relief was a heavy, almost physical thing that sat in my chest, mingling with the residual ache of betrayal. Chloe, the daughter I had once loved, was gone from our lives, but her threat no longer loomed over Sophia and Leo. Ben had returned from Denver late last night, exhaustion etched into his face, yet there was determination in his eyes. I hadn't seen since the ordeal began. He hugged Sophia and Leo as they tumbled into his arms, their laughter echoing around the apartment. For a moment, it felt like the world was normal again, fragile, but whole. We spent the morning unpacking groceries, laughing over small accidents. Leo dropping a piece of toast, Sophia spilling milk, and these tiny, mundane moments were steeped with unexpected gratitude. The children's laughter, once almost unbearable in its absence, now grounded me. I realized that rebuilding wasn't about grand gestures, but about routines, consistency, and the quiet affirmation that we were safe together. Later, we walked to the elementary school near St. Francis Church, holding hands along the familiar sidewalks. The city smelled of fresh bread from the bakery and damp earth from the morning drizzle. Ben recounted small stories from his job. Sophia interrupted with questions about her classmates, and Leo chattered about his toy dinosaurs. The ordinary details, once mundane, felt miraculous. By evening, we sat around the kitchen table. I made the chili I had always perfected for family meals. Plates clattered, laughter rose, and I watched Ben's careful attention to the children as he served them. Trust had been shattered, yes, but resilience had carried us forward. I knew the scars of betrayal would linger, but they no longer dictated our daily life. As I watched Sophia and Leo play quietly with their toys, a sense of peace settled over me. The ordeal had tested every instinct, every ounce of patience and courage I possessed, but it had also revealed the strength of family, of vigilance, and of love that refused to yield to fear. In that quiet evening glow, I felt it a new beginning, fragile but ours.